Good morning and welcome to another edition of Account Based Friday. Meg and I were just recounting on how we started. Gosh, it was 3+ years ago over the pandemic. And here we are, 200 plus episodes in. My co host, Meg, who ran Serious Decisions Research, and I have been doing this for 3+ years on go to market best practices. If you have interest in go to market best practices, in the upper corner of the screen, you can screenshot there and go right to the homepage of those videos. If you have a specific question, or you could reach out to Meg or I, we'd be happy to point you in the right direction as well. Super excited this morning. We've got Justin Nasiri joining us from Colorado early morning, and we're going to talk all things LinkedIn, which for a lot of people and a lot of companies, they're struggling with how do I brand myself? What's working? What's not working? And so really excited to dig in. Just in terms of logistics, we start each week with a poll, and I will bring up this week's poll. And this week's poll was related to LinkedIn, of a question around the biggest challenge of creating a personal brand on LinkedIn. And the majority of people, including myself, said creating engaging content. One of the challenges I find myself thinking about often is, what can I produce that people will actually engage with or is relevant or interesting to them? And it's difficult. It's really, really challenging to come up with content. But Meg, what was your reaction when you saw this?
I picked the same one because I do think especially for those of us who love to read a lot of other people's content. It's easy to kind of feel like, well, what else could I possibly have to bring to the conversation? What more can be said on this subject? And yet there are room for a lot of voices out there. And I think also sometimes we get scared to bring forward opinions or thoughts or ideas that are a little bit contrarian or outside of what other people are saying, for fear that we're going to have, we're going to start a firestorm when we didn't mean to. We were just trying to help. So then that kind of leads me to say, I wonder if the connecting authentically piece is perhaps more of an issue in the content creation area than we give it credit for in the poll. But that's why I think we're very lucky to have Justin here today to talk with us. Justin, you have been doing some incredible ongoing research around what really works on LinkedIn, and are also a great advisor on all things brand. So we're very excited for you to share your knowledge today.
Thank you.
John, any other introduction you want to make for Justin before we jump in?
The only other introduction I'll make is Justin's a Naval Academy graduate, and I give him a hard time because I was in the Army, so naturally we have kind of a light rivalry there, but we were just kidding around about a football game that my undergrad lost against the Naval Academy. But no, super excited to dig into this LinkedIn content, because I think everybody is really wrestling with, what should we be doing? The algorithm seems to be changing all the time. And some days I feel like personally, like, whoa, I just hit the cover off the ball. And the other days I'm like, man, I whiffed that completely. So would love to get, Justin, your perspective on the poll and just overall on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I think that's I think that the great news is also the worst news with LinkedIn. Is it's like anything else, it's all about consistency. And when I think about exercise, it feels like everyone's always looking for a hack. And the truth is, like, if you just go for a 20-minute walk every day, that's better than nothing. And what I find is when you're consistent, or that phrase, you're more likely to win the lottery if you buy more tickets. The trick here isn't to go for virality. It feels great when you have a post that just hits it home. But I believe that the only way to do that is just to have a lot of at bats. And I come back to what you said about authenticity. At the end of the day, people connect with other people. People like you for a reason. You show up as yourself consistently. Not every post is going to do great, but over time, just like exercising, just like saving for retirement, you're going to just slow and steadily build a tribe of people who value your perspective. You're building a megaphone. And so I'm excited to get into talking about engaging content, but I'm completely with Meg. At the end of the day, this is about authenticity and consistency. You do that, it is inevitable that you're going to grow an audience.
Yeah, that's an excellent point about the consistency and the authenticity. And I think one of the challenges that I've noticed on LinkedIn is you've got both the company pages and the personal pages. Would that advice equally apply to both sides, or do you bend toward one versus the other, or what are you seeing
I
there?
take an extreme position, which is I think the company pages are table stakes for LinkedIn, but no one goes on LinkedIn to follow a company or to engage with a faceless organization. LinkedIn is like any social network. It's about human to human connection. So when I talk with a company, I say like, "Hey, it's good that you have a company page. People will go there to do some homework, but you're going to get way better return from the CEO, the key leaders, the head of sales being active on LinkedIn." And one of the reasons is it's another human being, so it's more easy to connect. But a second one is every person on LinkedIn already has a network of people who know them, who like them, and trust them. The big problem for all of us is we're just not top of mind with that network. We have thousands of people we know from college or grad school or first job out of college or whatever it is. These people like us, they just don't think about us. And so when you get key leaders on a team showing up on LinkedIn, you start to be top of mind with that network. And then over time, if you're consistently adding value on a topic your audience cares about, you'll start to attract people who see you as a subject matter expert, as a thought leader in your space. So if you know more about, I don't know, running an automotive center than anyone else, and you talk about that and add value, you're going to attract people who value that. And that's going to be a megaphone that you can use for hiring, for sales, for fundraising, for M&A, for brand building. That's something that you can use for the life of your company and your entire career, because LinkedIn's not going away. So number one mistake I see people make is thinking about the company page. LinkedIn is not about faceless organizations, it's about people. And so put that oomph behind your key leaders, not behind the company.
So I'm interested to hear, you mentioned, putting focus on key leaders. What about everybody else? What role do those who are maybe a few layers removed from the C-suite, what role do they play? And what are some of the ways that folks can kind of think of themselves as active contributors to their company's presence and their own brand at the same time?
Yeah, I'm excited because my sense right now is that the youngest generation on LinkedIn, they get it more than everyone else, which is yes, they have a job, but they also have a career. They have a very long career ahead of them. And so I think that the individual benefits from being active on LinkedIn, and that benefits their company that they're currently at, but they're not going to be there forever. So if I were an account executive at a company, I think that there's an argument to be made for making sure, maybe it's once a week, making sure that they're showing up as best in their professional brand, in their executive brand, or if you want to call it personal brand, their personal brand. They have knowledge that's valuable. It might be sharing about their career journey. This is why I joined this company. This is what I learned this week. Even better yet, if you have the courage to do it, here's a mistake I made and what I learned. Bringing people along for the journey. It's just a weekly investment. It's almost like companies used to think about SEO and their website. The more you post, the more people can find you. The same is true with a personal brand. The more that you're sharing knowledge, sharing your journey, sharing authentically about who you are, it's just every week is an investment. So Meg, to your point, I think that this is something from the CEO to the janitor. This is something that benefits the individual. That's why I think you should do it. But it also is helpful for the company because it gets you top of mind with other people who may be interested in the company.
Yeah, that's a great point. And really liked your point about the thought leadership portion of just the consistency and the regularity, just like exercise or, like you said, retirement. You could be perceived as a thought leader by producing that content. What have you seen, out of curiosity, like what has changed in the thought leadership spectrum just over the last year or two, three? What changes have you seen there?
So, first of all, like I think that the worst truth that no one wants to admit is that the better known company is going to beat out the best company. And we talk to a lot of companies where they're like, we are the best in the space. We've been doing it for 20 years, but there's this company over here. They don't know what they're doing, but they're better known and we're losing to them. And so the sad truth, that's the old case study on VHS versus beta. You've got beta, which was the superior product at the time in every way, and VHS was better marketed, and that survived and beta went away. And that's true everywhere. So it's all about who knows you. It's all about whether you're known or not. Thought leadership, this has always been important for companies. And historically, thought leadership has been about going to a conference and giving a keynote, or being interviewed by Fortune magazine and you get distribution, or to some extent being a guest on a very popular podcast. The reason thought leadership works is it builds authority. You see someone on a stage and they say things that are intelligent, and you think, okay, that person knows what they're talking about. I want to work with them. And better than going after sales prospects, you get people coming to you. Hey, I loved what you have to say. Would you work with me? That's a great dynamic to have for sales. I think the biggest change that's happened in the last 10 years with thought leadership is that while conferences and bylines in big magazines continue to be important, what we've started to see is some faults with them. The first fault, in my opinion, is that traditional thought leadership is one way. I am on a stage speaking at a crowd. There's not really much opportunity for dialogue. And that's something that social media in general solves for. I can post and people can leave comments and we can have a back and forth dialogue, which is way more powerful. The second thing with traditional thought leadership is there's no data. So I can speak to a crowd at a conference. I might get applause or laughter. There's some feedback, so I know it's working. But by and large, there's no insight. What I love about LinkedIn is that when we work with someone and we get them posting daily for a month or two, we can literally come to them and say, hey, John, guess what? It turns out when you talk about A, B, and C, not to hurt your feelings, but no one cares. But when you talk about X, Y, and Z, people love it. We want to do more of that. And so it's almost like you could atomize a keynote and start to get discrete data about which talking points resonate so you can do more of it. And then the last thing that I love, with LinkedIn in particular versus traditional thought leadership is it is ongoing. You go to a keynote, you give a speech. If people are in the audience, great. If not, you lose out. You speak on Fortune, you get one chance in that magazine to get your message across. But with LinkedIn, you're cultivating an audience where every day you have access to them. This is something that will benefit you for your entire career. So that's why I think that this shift in thought leadership, or maybe an expansion, keynotes are still valuable, bylines are still valuable, but social media and LinkedIn in particular is just as valuable, if not more so.
So we've got a question over in chat, and after that, I'd love to come back to sort of how to help your team members get where they need to be on LinkedIn. But Mickey brings up an interesting question around fraud and scams and people who purport to be helping when really they're not. They're cheating you. What do you think? What are you seeing on that?
I think that that's always the case. There's always bad actors. I think that while LinkedIn is not perfect, it is tied to a professional identity. There is far less anonymity than a Reddit or a Twitter, a Twitter or something like that. So I think that that is one advantage because this is tied to someone's professional identity. You get less, you get a less pot shots, less people saying things that are just really, really mean. I think that there's a little bit more accountability by being tied to a professional identity. Yes, I think that there are a lot of fake people out there, but I think at the end of the day, you're talking about like 10,000, 15,000, 50,000 people following you. Yes, some percentage of that is not true people, but I think far less than elsewhere. And I think that this whole, giving advice that might be bad, there is some accountability there too, right? If you start to see me on LinkedIn selling, vitamin supplements, I think that it catches up to you. I think that over time you can get some short-term wins by acting in a way that doesn't have integrity, but in the long haul it tapers off. And I think that the people who are winning on LinkedIn, they are playing a long-term compound game. Add value, be generous, say things that are actually true. That is rewarded in the long haul.
Well, and Justin, you mentioned you've got some exciting data on some of those activities that you can be engaging in to compound your presence on LinkedIn. Any chance we could get a sneak preview?
Yeah, I'll give you a sneak preview. You have to take this with a really big forgiving lens because I'm going to share the Google document that we're working on for our annual State of the LinkedIn report that goes out next week. And so it's in this design phase where it's going to be made pretty. But I'll share my screen and I'll just point out a couple things that I found interesting so far. And the caveat before I share my screen, authenticity wins. Don't worry about gaming the algorithm. Produce content that's good, that's authentic to who you are. That is the foundation. But what I'll share with you is just some data that we've got from over 10,000 posts from our CEO and C-level clients that kind of shows you some trends and what works and what doesn't work. And so here's what I'll share with you. The first thing that I wanted to point out is that LinkedIn is all about original content. What you're seeing here on the right is that that original posts get way more engagement than reposts. I always tell people, do not bother to click repost. It just gets way fewer views. So that's the first thing. And when I look at someone's LinkedIn profile, most people are just reposting other people. The first thing I say is, look, that's not going to make a dent. If you want to be top of mind, if you want to build authority, you have to start publishing your own content in the LinkedIn newsfeed. The second thing that stood out to me is that when it comes to getting more views on LinkedIn, images by and large are the best thing you can do. We have found that if I post a text post and attach a good image to it, it's going to get 115% more views. So adding a photo to a LinkedIn post is by far the best way to get more views. And we'll talk about what those photos look like in a second. But the second thing is that carousels, those are those PDFs that you can slide through on LinkedIn, or in this graph, it's called a document. Carousels continue to do well. And so I can give examples of what those look like, but it's a great way to get views. You can allow people to swipe through, to have a nice visual, to add a little bit more nuance to a post. So carousels do well. Video, and that's native video uploaded to LinkedIn, not linked to YouTube. Native video on LinkedIn does well, but it does just barely better than text. And so, yes, video is great, but my guess is that for most people, video is going to take a lot more time to produce than just writing a text post. I'm guessing that in the same amount of time that it would take you to create a video and do a little bit of light editing, you could probably bust out 3, 4, 5 text posts. So based on how similar these are, I always tell people, look, text should be your default. If you can add a photo or add a carousel, even better. Video is great for building a relationship, but the juice really isn't worth the squeeze when it barely does better than text posts. One last one that I'll jump down to. I wanted to talk just a little bit more about images, and then I'll stop my monologue. But one of the things we looked at is, okay, the best 10% of image posts amongst our data set versus the worst 10%. And what's different? That was interesting to me. So the first thing that stood out, this big blue, is photos. It's all about photos versus the worst 10% is all about graphics. If you're like me and you're scrolling the news feed and I see a highly produced graphic, my mind, I think that's an advertisement. I keep on scrolling, but I see a photo with someone I know and I engage. So it's all about photos. It's not about graphics. More specifically, we then broke it down and said, okay, what's the subject of these photos? The top third of these top 10%, it's a selfie only. I think we kind of know that that works. We see a human face that we recognize, we engage. So selfies obviously work. What I thought was more important is the vast majority of these isn't me just snapping a selfie. It's me with other people. So John, he's on a panel at an event, taking an event with him and the other panelists, even better than just a photo of him. Or me taking a photo with me and my team, way better than just me. So don't be afraid to include others. So I'll stop the share there just to make sure I'm not boring people. But that was some of the things that stood out to me, and hopefully that's helpful for the audience as well.
Yeah, I can't wait to see the report. You said it's coming out next week.
Well, talk to my designer, but yeah, next week at latest the week after. As usual, things take longer than we'd hope. But in the next 2 weeks.
Well, that's awesome. That I can't wait to read it, and I would violently agree with your observations. Just on my own, I felt like I was shaking my head, like, oh my God, video takes a long time to produce. And yes, if you do a picture with people on a panel, that seems to resonate. Also, because you're tagging them and you get their network as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would violently agree on everything there. One of our audience members, Kanako, who comes to several of our conversations, she has a really good question, mainly around this new capability that LinkedIn has about contributing expertise. And like LinkedIn has a section now where you can ask a question and then you could showcase your expertise. Is there any suggestions on how to balance, balance that perspective on posts versus articles? And I will put a little asterisk by this. In my experience, those articles, I have not got a lot of traction on articles from a view perspective because they're long form. They typically take a lot longer to digest. But I'm curious, like, you're the authority. So what are you seeing there?
My sense on this, Kanako, is if I had a pie chart of time, it would be one color and it would be posts. I think that LinkedIn is all about the posts. And a post for me, there's not a lot of room for nuance. It's kind of one point. You make one point, you put it out there. The next day, you put out another one. So I think that posts is where it's all at. The contribute expertise, in my view, I'll tell you how I use that. When my 18-month-old daughter was asleep and I had to sit in the room, I would just pound out answers to expertise. I did that for a couple of days. I got a top voice in entrepreneurship. I screenshotted that on it. I had it for 60 days and I stopped doing it and I lost it. I thought it was like valuable for me to say like, hey, I was a top voice, but I think it's just literally if you regularly contribute, you'll get it. I don't really see the value in that badge. It's different than the one that LinkedIn gives. I just don't see the value yet. It doesn't seem like they give any algorithmic authority to someone. So I'm at a loss as the value of that. And then articles, every Friday I produce a newsletter, which is essentially articles. And I would say that to me is a long-term investment. I post 6 days a week. One of them is quote unquote an article for my newsletter. It doesn't get nearly as much traction as my posts, but it's a long-term investment in cultivating an audience that wants to go deeper. Newsletters and articles give room for nuance. So that's kind of the long-term investment. But most people, it's better to play the short-term game, and that is daily or weekly posts, whatever you can do consistently.
Well, and we'll be sure to share links to first so folks can sign up for your newsletter and make sure to get that
Thank you.
report out there, and we can share replay of this as well. I'm always curious, it's so tempting as a marketing leader to want to provide your team with kind of detailed ways to engage. So copy this and put it on your LinkedIn kind of thing. But I also worry that even though I think it's helpful not to make people start from a blank piece of paper, you also don't want to have every single person in the company putting the same sentences out there on LinkedIn, because then it starts to look like you go back to the company page problem, right? It's not a person, it's just, all of the above. What are your thoughts on the kinds of guidance that help people build their success on LinkedIn? How much is too much? How much is not enough?
I think first and foremost, most people overlook the value of commenting, and commenting on a post is way easier than writing your own post. And if you really want to be strategic, commenting on someone who has a similar audience, but a much bigger one. And so if I, were advising a team, before I would have them copying and pasting things, I would say, hey, our target customer, they really follow these 3 people. They write really good content. If you can just go and read their post and write a quick comment, that's probably more valuable than you just posting on your own. And it's way easier, right? I can write a comment in 10 seconds. So that's the first thing I would look at. Who are the people in your space that have more authority? If you're reading their content, you're educating yourself, which is valuable. And then if you're contributing, it's great. It's just like throwing your voice in a conversation. And if you can be one of the first people commenting, even better. There's a kind of outsized reward for the first people to comment with valuable things to say. So that's the first way I direct people, is just be part of the mix, be part of the conversation. That gets them in the motion of sharing their opinions and interacting. And I think that gets people out of their shell. And then the next step for me would be to say, hey, here's something big going on at the company, or here's some knowledge, something that we learned that might benefit people, and I would try to share that with them live, right? Or in Zoom or however we do this. And then say, hey, if you want to share this on LinkedIn, what are you taking away from this? Then I'm not telling them what to say. I'm giving them information. What was valuable to you? If it was valuable to you, it's valuable to your audience. And what I like about that is if I say 5 minutes of information or a company milestone or whatever else, they can take that and in their own words share, like, hey, I was just at a meeting, our CEO shared this, I thought it was so exciting. That to me is more authentic. They're going to put it in their words, and that the copy paste thing, I think, just does not work. Last thing though is it doesn't have to be them sharing. If let's say a head of sales writes a great post, I can actually help them. And specifically the actions I would recommend to help them are, I would go to their post, I would click on see more, I would click on like, I would comment, and then I would view that person's profile. As far as we understand it, those are the 4 tiny actions someone can take to get a post more visibility. See more, comment, like, view the profile. That's just showing LinkedIn, hey, what this person said was valuable, and it's going to get them more visibility. So just to summarize there, commenting, posting in your own words, or engaging with a colleague's post.
Those are awesome nuggets, Justin. We could probably talk all morning here, and especially when that report gets published. Maybe we have you come back.
You.
We're bumping up against time here,
game.
but excellent conversation. I guess I put in the link here, your LinkedIn. Is that the best way to connect with you if people have?
That or on my LinkedIn post, but I obviously love talking about this stuff. We weren't able to get to every question, but if people have questions, happy, send me an email, add a comment, or find me in any way, and I'll do my best to help out.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, fantastic. Grateful for you joining. Meg, any closing thoughts or comments?
Thank you, Justin. This has been incredibly helpful. And I know we're all super excited to see your data when it comes out in a week-ish.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we Meg, I'm going to have you introduce next week's guest in a moment, but just give the audience members a heads up. We're going to go dark for the month of August intentionally. We're regrouping in September. So, enjoy your holiday in August on Fridays. You won't be hearing from us. But we do have a couple more episodes this month. And Meg, you have a special guest next week?
Yes, next week I'm excited to welcome a former colleague of mine from a number of years ago who his name is Tom Shimko, and he is a notable marketing leader of a number of really great brands. And he has been taking some of the marketing method that he's developed over his career, and he's helping others apply it to their job search. So how do you take a more methodical, defined approach using the principles of great marketing to find your next best role? So I'm excited for Tom to share some of his most recent thinking on that subject, and you'll hear more about that next week.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you at the same time next week.
Happy Friday.